Hello everyone, I am Storyteller. Thank you for visiting this peaceful place. I know you are looking for something soothing to help you fall asleep, and I am here to accompany you. If you enjoy, please give me a like and subscribe, and let me know where you are from. Thank you. C-section. Scar. I can pack all of my belongings and my son's in under 30 minutes. I attribute part of this to my military kid upbringing. My parents liked to live the minimalist lifestyle. They'd only put a few decorations up here and there. And while I hated seeing bare walls on each house or apartment we lived in, I definitely see the appeal now. My son is homeschooled because it is easier to do that than explain to his teachers why we move so often. And before you ask, it's not because of the military. Granted, my son is only in first grade, so I'm finding the material relatively easy to teach. But I'm sure in a few years, it'll get hairy. My son, Carter, is always a good sport about leaving. He may not fully understand why at times, but he's too young for me to tell the whole story, and I don't want to burden him with that right now. This has been the longest we've stayed in one place. It's almost been 8 months now, which I've found is long enough for Carter to make friends, and I loved and hated that at the same time. Not at the thought of him making friends, but the inevitable conversation I'm going to have with him when the time comes to leave. He took the last move a little hard, and frankly, I did too. I moved us to the West Coast, a place I had always wanted to live since I was little, but never got the chance to. I wanted Carter to breathe in the saltiness of the seawater, put his feet in the sand, and build sand castles. I wanted him to experience what it was like to just be a kid for once, and hopefully put down roots. And he got to do that, but only for a measly 4 weeks. Now, living in dreary Seattle, a place I never wanted to move because of its constant gloominess and downpouring rain, is the place we get to call home. Well, at least until she finds us again. And I hope, for Carter's sake, she won't. I supposed I should now tell you the story of why we are running. On the day that I turned 38, I realized how quickly my biological clock was ticking. I had 2 failed marriages at that point, and I was desperate to have my own child. I did a few rounds of IVF using a sperm donor, and when I received countless negative pregnancy tests, my hope dwindled, and so did my bank account. I felt hopeless until my sister volunteered to carry my child for me and be my surrogate. I was surprised, to say in the least, considering we had a rocky relationship over the years and rarely saw eye to eye. But when she offered to be my surrogate, it was as though we had a clean slate. Though I'll admit at times that I was jealous that she could be pregnant while I couldn't. But I knew without her, I wouldn't be having a child. I was just thankful she was doing this for me. Her labor was horrendous. She pushed and pushed for hours and wanted nothing more than a natural home birth. The home birth was one she planned for as soon as she found out she was pregnant. Instead, she was taken to the hospital for an emergency C-section. I held her hand the entire time throughout the ride in the ambulance and to the surgery. I felt as though I had taken a breath for the first time when I heard his cry. When he was set in my arms instead of hers, I watched her joyous expression turn to envy. As she laid in the hospital bed, recovering, she stared at him in the bassinet before turning to me. "Can I name him?" My eyes flickered towards her, her mouth agape as she gave me a sweet smile. "Name him?" I asked, still in awe. Yeah, I had a whole list of names while I was pregnant, and now that I've seen him, I have the perfect name. She paused, waiting for my reaction. I raised my eyebrow, and she replied, "Elliot." Excitement was written all over her face as soon as she said it. While I didn't hate the name, I have always wanted to name my son Carter. There were no words to explain how grateful I was that she did this for me. But I couldn't just give up the name that I've been wanting to use for years. Carter Elliott Smith. Her face dimmed when I said this. "So you won't use Elliot as his first name?" I shook my head, and she plastered on a fake smile, one that I thought was real at the time. "I love it." When I left to go to the bathroom, I thought I heard her call him Elliot, but I didn't know if I was just being paranoid and hearing things, so I brushed it off. The first couple months were hard, way harder than I was expecting. He was colicky, barely sleeping, and therefore neither did I. My sister was more than helpful, and even started living in my guest room to help with those late-night feeds and anything else I needed. It was perfect until I woke up one morning and they were gone. It took me almost a week to find them, and that was only because my mom managed to trap them at her house. My mom knew that she took him as her own when she called him Elliot. Now, looking back at it, I wish I never would have taken her up on her offer. Not that I don't love my son, but I don't love having to move every time she discovers where we live. I hoped she would move on by now, but she's reminded of Carter anytime she glances down at her C-section scar. I heard feet scuffle in the hallway, and my breath hitches every time I hear the sound of shoes close to our door. Not knowing whose they were, I walked over to the door and stood on my tiptoes. She's standing right in front of the door, as if she knows I'm standing behind it. She smiles that sinister smile of hers and says, "You can't run forever." The fulfillment, swaths of red and blue, intermittently flooded my vision. Beneath the flimsy plastic, my limbs still pulsed with adrenaline. Initially, the barrage of sirens and shouts was an audible assault. But now, my thundering heart drowned most of it out. An officer loomed over me, his mouth forming words that failed to reach my ears. The paramedics seemed to retort, much to his chagrin. I cast my gaze upon the modern structure ahead, an incandescent glow piercing the night. Panels of glass stared back like watchful eyes, knowing the truth of what lay within. The smooth chime of a bell reverberated through the room, joined by the squeak of feet on yoga mats. My eyelids fluttered open, just in time to see the instructor place a hand gently over her heart and give a slight bow. A lithe figure next to me uncurled like a cat, stretching to life, feline and graceful in her movements. Her name-brand attire hugged her toned curves, the same curves that I'd seen in an Instagram post this morning. Retreat Day 1. Learning to love my body. The caption was a paragraph thinly veiled as self-love and content, but the undertones bled through. Despite, rather, instead. I learned I don't need It Was Smoke and mirrors, the edited photos, smiling to promote green juices, the constant upgrade of wardrobes and skincare products and makeup. Behind the facade was a girl grasping at the straws of relevancy and follower counts. And judging by the way she cut her eyes at the woman in the front row of the studio now, the straws were becoming further out of reach. Allison Divino. I recalled her name then, as she continued to glare at the woman. Long auburn locks whipped in my direction as Allison spun on her heel to leave. The woman under the fire of Allison's burning gaze appeared none the wiser. She smiled as she departed, holding an air of confidence that only a ruthless businesswoman could. Genevieve Sterling, financial investment heiress and CEO. It's no wonder Allison was green with envy. After all, I imagined the salary of an influencer paled in comparison. And how nice would it be to start life with a silver spoon? I made another mental note, trying to piece together the puzzle of faces I'd encountered last night at the welcome dinner, albeit a somewhat difficult task at a silent retreat. As I made my way to the doorway, a burly shoulder jostled against my own. Glancing to the side, I was met with the red-faced glare of Victor Russo, the lawyer who constantly seemed on the verge of a tantrum. For him, this event seemed more like mandatory anger management than a relaxing weekend of introspection. Victor grumbled something, shoving his way past me and out of the boiling studio. Hot yoga was never something I'd been eager to try, and the sweat pricking my skin reminded me of that. I yearned for a shower. I padded my way down the hall to my assigned room. Stretches of glass greeted me, late afternoon sunshine glistening upon the elaborate furnishings. As I turned on the shower, steam curling into the air and coating the mirror, I observed my reflection. Brunette hair, stringy with sweat. Obsidian eyes gazing back, muscles aching. I peeled off my tank top. In doing so, a prickling sensation tingled beneath the skin of one of my shoulder blades. I strained my neck to inspect it in the mirror. A patch of redness had started to form, itching with each movement, skin flexing. Running a few fingers over the spot, I hissed, the sting palpable. Perhaps it was from one of the yoga positions, rubbing against the mat as I tried, unsuccessfully, to keep up. Stepping into the steam, I relished the warm caress. Since dinner wasn't for another hour, I took my time washing, scrubbing, and generally enjoying the sound of silence. I could tell most of the others were already struggling to cope with the drastic dissolution of most noise. All of them extroverts in their daily lives. This was a challenge for them. My thoughts wandered as I went about primping myself for dinner. After curling my hair, applying makeup, strapping on my heels, and sliding a pendant around my neck, I shimmied into my dress. A vibrant red. The satin of it clung in all the right places. A flat note that gradually increased in volume hummed from the digital panel by the door. Dinner time. The savory aroma of roasting meat wafted through the dining hall. My mouth watered. The chefs here were world class. The welcome dinner the night prior exemplified that as I had torn into a leg of lamb and wolfed down perfectly steamed asparagus, so I knew tonight would be no different. Oh. Our selected meals were hand-delivered to each of us, half the group abstaining from meat. As I sliced into the steak before me, crimson juices pooling, my skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. I glanced up, a pair of blue eyes catching mine. His chiseled features were intense, and he didn't avert his gaze as he took a bite of his meal. The twitch of a slight smile pulled at the corners of his mouth as he continued to stare. Jackson Rothmeyer, corporate real estate mogul. I'd seen his icy gaze before, plastered across the media. He even had his own Wikipedia page. Quite the accomplishment for someone in real estate. But the way his eyes traveled ever lower made my skin crawl. He was married, after all, his wife having attended many of his philanthropic appearances. The stare down seemed to last forever, finally interrupted by the crash of glass. Everyone turned. In the far corner of the room, a bulbous man in a designer suit waved a waiter away as he attempted to collect the shattered remnants of a whiskey glass. He adjusted his tie with fumbling fingers, and if this hadn't been a silent retreat, he probably would have slurred his words. Howard Gunnison, former politician and drunkard, the man was notoriously scummy. So when I saw his face last night, I almost laughed out loud at the notion of such a human trying to better themselves. And, quite obviously, the mission was not going well. He had to have snuck a flask in to get that tanked between yoga and dinner. At the table across from Howard, a posh woman in a pantsuit curled her lip in disgust at the scene. Melissa Ellsworth, entrepreneur and public speaker. Melissa had graced many stages in her career, discussing the ins and outs of successful entrepreneurship. The details of her rags to riches story pulled on the heartstrings of the nation, inspiring the laymen to believe that perhaps they too could start their own clothing brand from the ground up. Forks scraping plates pierced the quiet, with the occasional mumble from Howard as he beckoned for a new glass of whiskey. Melissa rolled her eyes over her wine glass as she took a prolonged sip. Our fearless leader and head of the retreat entered the room then. Michael Solomon, his long hair, was tied back into a ponytail, linen clothing hanging from his thin frame. Head held high, he appraised the value of his guests, and judging from the slight sneer, I gathered that value was rather low. Conceit dwelled within him. I could sense it from a mile away. Without a word, Michael raised his hands in a gesture of thanks. The guests nodded in silence as he departed. We had seen very little of Michael since our arrival, and truthfully, he was a bit of a recluse. Perhaps that's why he enjoyed running a silent retreat. I tossed my napkin on my plate, excusing myself from dinner. With a bit of disdain, I passed by Howard, feeling his eyes on me as I brushed a bit too close to his table. I couldn't stand another second of being ogled or watching a rich drunkard make an utter fool of himself. Just after slipping off my heels, a light knock rapped against the door. Without the advantage of a peephole, I was forced to open it without screening my visitor. Jackson leaned in the doorway, hair slightly tousled. "I know we're not supposed to talk," he whispered, "but I saw the way you were looking at me at dinner." I cocked an eyebrow inquisitively, mostly at his audacity. "Don't play coy," he continued. "I know what you want, and I understand." He understands because I want it too. His hands were suddenly on me, groping, his breath hot on my neck. My skin screamed in disgust beneath his touch, and pain ignited as his hand brushed over the spot on my shoulder blade. I hissed, which he interpreted as a green light, pushing himself on me further. "I knew you wanted..." The words breathlessly tumbling from his lips were cut short, and he glanced down, wincing. A shining blade protruded from his chest. A stain, like spilled wine, spreading across the virgin white of his shirt. Blood replaced words, and he sputtered in his collapse. I took a step back, watching him crumple against the wood, smearing its polished surface. He shuddered briefly before stilling. Jackson Rothmeyer, adulterer, was no more. This wasn't his first offense, either. He was a serial offender when it came to infidelity. "Oh my God!" A horrified voice came from the hall. Allison, frozen in place, trembled. The front of my dress was stained, blood plastered across my arms. Undoubtedly, a horrifying sight. I watched as she fumbled to find her phone. The phone that I had earlier swiped from her table on my way out of dinner while she was busy glaring at Genevieve. If anyone was a liability to call for police, it was the influencer practically glued to her phone, and I needed more time. "Please," she begged, stumbling back. I had originally planned this differently, but she just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. My muscles screamed as I lunged for her. She squealed like a frantic pig. Scarlet footprints trailed me as I chased Allison into the dining hall. Again, she screamed, this time as she noticed Howard slumped over his unfinished plate, eyes blank and glassy. That one had been rather easy. A quick drop of a pill into his whiskey on my way out of the dining hall, and a long enough onset for the crowd to clear out before he succumbed. A silent tick off the checklist. There was no need for Allison to cry over Howard. Not only was he a scumbag, but his drunkenness had taken the life of another. A few years prior, blitzed from a night at the bar, Howard had struck and killed a teenage girl who had snuck out of her house. Thanks to Howard's power and some unfortunately good connections, he faced the lowest possible sentence. Allison's wailing brought me back to the moment. She cowered in a corner, eyes darting wildly in search of an escape. Though she was the lowest offender on my list, I still couldn't let her go. It was a formality. I plucked a knife from a nearby table and flung it forward with a dizzying speed. The crying stopped, and Allison slumped against the wall, the handle of the blade jutting from her eye socket. Footsteps echoed from down the hall, and I turned just in time to see Victor gawking and tripping into the room before wheeling backward. "What the?" His face blanched, a stark contrast to the usual beet red. He clutched his chest and staggered back. "Help," he croaked. This one would finish itself, I supposed. Victor collapsed. I stepped carefully over to him. For a few moments, he clawed at my claves, pulled at the hem of my dress, sputtered, then silence. No longer would Victor's temper detonate at the expense of others, namely his battered wife. No longer would the law protect him from the wreckage of his short fuse. I paused for a moment, surveying the mess. Things had been set in motion now, and there was no going back. An hour later, I found myself sitting alone in the foyer. Luckily, I had managed to avoid any more blood. In one room, Melissa hung from the ceiling fan by a twisted, overpriced dress one of her company's very own. But I was certain the children who fabricated it in her sweatshops, one of whom perished due to poor labor conditions. Wouldn't be too sad. Melissa had never lifted a finger to go the extra mile in life. And now she didn't even lift a finger in her own death. In another room, Genevieve lay still, adjacent to a gun that had likely cooled off by now. She snuck it in for protection, a paranoia developing since her defrauding tendencies were exposed to the public tendencies that cost so many others their livelihoods, while she raked in the profits. It was ironic. Her career had been upheaved by a smoking gun, and now she was leaving this world by a smoking gun. I tallied 6 bloody fingers, sitting cross-legged under a lone chandelier. Only one more to complete the requirements. I caught him earlier, cowering in a storage closet with a cell phone, but knew I had to save him for last. With the retreat being so isolated, I knew I had some time to wrap things up. I gathered my remaining strength, peeling myself from the floor. "Michael!" I called lackadaisically. My voice ricocheted in the barren foyer. I never did grasp the appeal of the minimalist aesthetic, the coldness and emptiness of it. Like a fox in winter, I stalked through the white-walled expanse, listening intently for my prey. A muffled sob came from the storage closet. The idiot hadn't even bothered to move. I knocked politely, opening the door to reveal the coward huddled in the far corner. "Stay back," he shouted, wielding a mop handle in defense. "I'm warning you." Michael, you just don't get it, do you?" My tone was condescending. There was some enjoyment in watching this pompous man wither. "You made a deal, and this is part of the deal. What the hell are you talking about?" I clucked my tongue, chuckled. "Hell? That's funny. You see, Michael, I know for as spiritual as you are, you can't make the world butterflies and rainbows through manifestation alone. No amount of writing out your dreams in a vegan leather journal will make them come true." "How did you know about my journal?" he asked, eyes narrowed. "Michael, I know everything. Everything about everyone. Truths you couldn't fathom. You called on a higher, or perhaps I should say, lower power for help. And here I am to seal the deal. Consider me a bounty hunter of sorts." I scratched my itching back as I tried to dumb it down for him. "Michael Solomon, you made a deal with the devil to get your dream life at any expense necessary. So that means murdering my guests and livelihood?" he cried. "In this case, yes. It's no simple feat to take that much energy from the universe to spend on one selfish person. Souls are required. Souls of 7 people, 7 deadly sins." "I don't understand," I sighed, exasperated, and proceeded to check off the requirements. Jackson Lust, Allison Envy, Howard Gluttony, Victor Wrath, Melissa Sloth, Genevieve Greed. I counted, putting a finger down with each name until only one remained. That leaves Pride. I could tell he still wasn't following. "I know how high you hold yourself, Michael, looking down your nose at others. And the fact that you were willing to sacrifice anything for your benefit says it all. The gears clicked into place in Michael's mind, and he started to sob. Please, I'll do anything. We've already gone that route, Michael. Besides, you had your dream life, a successful business in solitude, where you could control the lives of others exactly how you wanted. It just happened to have an expiration date. I snatched the mop, snapping it in half over my knee. The unevenness of splintered wood made as good a weapon as any at the moment. Michael trembled, closed his eyes. Don't worry, it's all about to be over. With one swift jab, I checked off the final requirement. I tossed the other half of the mop handle aside with a clatter. The sting in my shoulder blades blossomed into a full-blown ache, and I rolled them to quell the pain. Not long now, slowly, I wound my way back to the foyer, sucking in breath after breath, quicker and quicker, until I was practically hyperventilating. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer before screaming into the drive. I held my breath and willed the tears to come until they streaked down my ruddy cheeks. Police! Come out with your hands up! I obeyed, whimpering in my exit. Please, help me! I screeched. He tried to kill me. I had to do it. He killed them all. I collapsed to my knees in the moonlight, feeling a heat begin to burn as the gravel bit into them. Once they cleared me, the paramedics quickly became preoccupied with searching for signs of life inside the blood-soaked retreat. The cops questioned me, but I feigned catatonia. It didn't matter anyway. I could feel the pull towards home, my skin smoldering beneath the emergency blanket. For a brief moment, no one watched me. I shrugged off the blanket, once again rolling my shoulders. The ache crescendoed, skin tightening. I winced, and one by one, feathers burst forth in two black plumages, wings of the fallen. The mission was complete, and the heat emanating from the earth beckoned me. It's time, a familiar voice hissed. The heat intensified, another 7 souls feeding the flames. The Pinch ELCV 28, Earth's last chance vessel 28, was slowing down after 5 months at elevated distance speed. The 3-person crew were starting to feel the pinch. The pinch, as it had become known, was the phenomenon whereby the greater the distance from Earth, the more the human heart and brain would become panicked, fatigued, strained, and lost, as though there was an invisible bungee attaching everyone's core to the planet. There wasn't yet an acceptable scientific explanation for this effect. But the crew of the ELC-28 were really feeling it. They had just crossed the 960 million kilometers from the Earth, heading perpendicular to the gravitational rotation of the solar system. It's always worse going south, Carl said with a smirk, looking across the table at 2 distraught faces. What do you mean, south? Casper said angrily. There is no south, north, east, west. Just black, black everywhere. Listen, I've been through this 7 times, Carl said, trying to keep his cool and maintain a sense of leadership. And that's another thing, Pearl said, getting drawn in by Casper's outrage. How can this be the last chance if there were already 27 previous last chances that have failed? The Earth's last chance missions had been funded globally and quickly established as the best chance of survival for the human race. Every nation had poured all of their resources and remaining workforce into it. Since it had been scientifically established 50 years prior that humanity would not survive much beyond 3397 on its current trajectory without finding another safe, inhabitable planet or a source of infinitely extractable energy. It was a question that had floated between Casper and Pearl for some time now. What had happened to the previous 27? And how had Carl come back every time? The first 15 ELC missions had been manned by larger and more experienced crews. By the 20th, there was no time to train anyone to the standard that was required. By this point, people were mandatorily encouraged to join a crew in a variety of ways. Shorter prison sentences, the promise of financial security for their extended family, and the knowledge they may be helping the survival of the human race as a whole. But it was becoming ever harder to recruit new people. Pearl was a space cadet in her 20s before the sudden, unexpected, and overwhelming societal dread. Now she wanted to volunteer in the hopes her kids might survive. Casper had some experience as an astronaut before being forcibly ejected after jeopardizing a mission due to drug use aboard the ship 5 years prior. He had been court-martialed, but promised a complete pardon if he volunteered for the ELC missions. Think yourselves lucky, Carl said. The first 3 missions I was on had 10-person crews, then 6. Now we're down to 3. It's much easier this way. More food, more room. All we have to do now is locate the BL hip and choose who's going in first. The BL hip, black hole with inversion potential, was a discovery made in the year 2868. A micro black hole less than 300 microns in diameter could, with the right equipment, be inverted to create a temporary door in space, which could theoretically lead anywhere. The hardest part was locating the BLH EPS. The ELCV-28 was the furthest any ELC had had to travel so far, and it was understood that the effect of the pinch could be life-threatening beyond 1,000 million km. The first attempt to send anything through a BLA chip in 2950 was an automated sensor-packed bot. But the bots would only be able to communicate data back to the vessel for a maximum of 20 minutes before losing all connection. It was later deemed more cost-effective to attempt to send humans through, with the hope of reopening the door for them to return with any data collected. This was soon stopped After 5 failed missions, as it was believed inhumane, as the participants were never heard from again. After entering the BLA chip, until the recent determination of the definitive extinction of the human race. Do you ever go first? Casper said cynically. Well, no, not so far. Carl defensively shot back. Listen, like it or not, I am the captain on this ship. I have the most experience, and I'll have to be here to guide us home. Guide one of us home, Pearl said. Only you and one of us have any hope of making it home, right? When she said home, her voice cracked sorrowfully. Look, you have to fight the effects of the pinch. I know it's getting to us all, but if we let it, we'll end up like EL-CV9. And no one wants that. What happened on EL-CV9? Asked Casper. Let's just say they never made it to the BL hip, said Carl. The only reason I'm able to deal with the pinch is because I've done this so many times. I'm used to it now, and I know how to keep myself together. But rest assured, I'm feeling it too. This is the furthest I've been, and it's starting to put a strain on me. So you've never been in a BL hip? But you're happy to send us in, knowing we won't come back out, Pearl said, with a sense of righteous outrage. Oh, I've been in, Pearl, said Carl. Do you think they'd let me lead these missions if I'd never been in? And people come out all the time when there's nothing on the other side worth exploring. And if they're quick enough to realize that fact and get back through the BL hip before it closes. What was it like on the other side? Pearl asked skeptically. Black, just black, Carl said. Zeus scanner deployment. The standard procedure is to send through a scanner bot to establish the chances of anything worth exploring before sending in a human. The data received back from the bots is usually minimal, and often scrambled to the point that it's not 100% reliable. Then humans go through anyway. Okay, Casper, you can pilot the scanner. Just remember, the beam can only hold the BH lip open for 5 minutes, so get yourself perfectly lined up, Carl commanded. Casper sat facing the controls for the scanner and began maneuvering it into place. If I'm doing this part, that means I'm not the first one going in, right? Casper insisted. Afraid that's not how it works, Casp, Carl said firmly. The scanner was guided through the 5-meter hole in space. The hole that had opened wasn't black, as Casper and Pearl were expecting, but an iridescent glow of pink and purple. Beautiful and mesmerizing, yet somehow off-putting, like oil in a puddle. Pearl and Casper had returned to sitting in the recreational dining area of the ship, while Carl pored over the scanner results. After 45 minutes, Carl walked in. Okay, do you want the good news or the bad news? Carl said, smiling. What the hell does that mean? Casper reacted angrily. Keep a handle on the pinch, Carl said calmly. No need to start losing it over every little thing. Okay, The good news is there is a strong reading of biological and atmospheric conditions within an area reachable in a solo flight suit. The solo flight suits were designed for independent space travel, with built-in directable propulsion and terrestrial landing capability. They had a range of up to 190,000 kilometers in an open space, but don't have the power or propulsion to lift off once within the gravitational influence of a planet. And the bad news? Asked Pearl. The bad news is that one of you two is going to have to go in and try to reach it, and report back anything you find, Carl said glumly. But not you? Casper said, red in the face. Casper, we've been through this, Carl said tiredly. The important thing is that as soon as you touch down, you report back with as much information as you can gather. On your communicator, keep in mind you may only have minutes before the BL hip closes. So who decides who goes in? Pearl asks. Well, I'll give you both 30 minutes. And if neither of you have decided, I'll decide, Carl said matter-of-factly. Carl left them both sitting across from each other at the dining table and retreated to the cockpit, keeping an ear out for any overreactive arguments. Carl knew that this was the time that anger had spilt over into violence in the past. His mind recollected the stories he'd heard about ELC-V9 and shuddered. Not on my watch, Carl thought to himself. So do you want to go in first? Pearl said, trying to maintain a tone of civil diplomacy. I mean, let's face it, we're probably both going in eventually. I take it from your tone that you're not going to volunteer yourself, and that you want me to want to go in to alleviate your conscience, Casper responded calmly, but with an air of arrogance. And next, I expect you'll bring up your children and talk about how much you would love to see them again, to try to guilt me into doing the right thing. Only the right thing, in this context, just happens to be the thing that you want. Casper's tone was becoming increasingly aggravated. Fine, I'll go first, Pearl said. Carl, who'd been listening the whole time through the ship's wall, walked into the dining area with authority. Okay, I've decided, Pearl. As Casper said, we both understand that you're probably desperate to see your kids again. But for that to happen, you will have to go in. And Casper, if Pearl goes in first, you will be right behind her, no matter what, Carl said, remembering his training. Okay, fine. I'll go first, Casper said. Good choice, Carl said, looking proudly at Casper. X first entry. Casper suited up and stepped out of the ship's airlock. Carl and Pearl watched from the cockpit window as he powered towards the glowing hole in space. They watched as Casper fearlessly approached and slipped through. Are you hearing me, Casper? Carl spoke into the ship's communicator. What do you see? I can hear you all right, Casper said, with an excitable inflection. All sounds of the pinch had gone from his voice. Woo! It's beautiful. What sort of planet is it? Carl asked. Nothing came back from the communicator for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. It's just like Carl heard eventually, followed by a long, drawn-out beep. "What did he say?" Pearl asked in an excitable tone. "It's just like I—" And then it cut off. Carl answered. "Just like what?" Pearls said, frustrated. "I don't know." Carl responded. "Let's listen to it back again." Carl replayed the message. "It's just like Ira," came out of the machine. Pearl said, puzzled. What? Recognize? Remember? You're going to have to go in after him, Pearl, Carl said, looking back at her. "And you'll follow, right?" Pearl said pleadingly. "Of course, I'm not going to miss another opportunity," Carl said. "What does that mean?" Pearl asked, frowning. "It wasn't just black, the one you went through. Was it, Carl? You were just too afraid to make landfall because you knew that would be a one-way ticket." Carl looked down, ashamed. "It wasn't as simple as that," Carl said. "There are lots of planets that can come back with breathable atmospheres on the scanners. But when people go through, it's a death trap. The one I saw when I went through was not right. The sky was orange, and the land was black. I knew straight away that if I touched down, I'd never be coming back." "So you were scared," Pearl scoffed. "And yet you've sent plenty of scared people to their deaths. How do you know this one will be any different? And yet you are more than happy to send me through." Casper said, "It's beautiful." "Do you think he would have said that if it didn't at least look safe?" Carl said encouragingly. "The BL hip will stay open long enough for you to establish a connection with Casper. He should have made landfall by now if it's safe. And you'll know if you should turn back. And you can come straight back through. Ix landfall." With that, Pearl suited up and reluctantly entered. Carl sat waiting, watching, and trying to calculate how long it might take for Pearl to communicate with Casper, and how long he'd have before the BL hip would close. "Anything from Casper?" Carl asked nervously through the communicator. "Is he alive?" A long pause. "Wait, he's talking," Pearl said. "He's ranting and raving. I can barely make it out." Another long pause. "He says it's Ert," Pearl said. With that, the BL hip closed suddenly. Carl sunk his head into his hands in despair. "It's Earth?" Carl thought. Was that what Casper was saying? It can't be. There are no BL hips that close to Earth. I would know. Unless one has formed since we've been traveling. Or maybe a new BL hip is created when we travel, though? Nobody knows for sure. Carl thought. He sat and dwelled on this new information for some time. He could wait for Pearl to make landfall, then travel through. But if Casper was wrong, then he, Pearl, and the ship would all be lost. And if he was right, and it was, in fact, Earth, all that's been achieved is finding a shortcut back home. Still would have lost the ship, and the Earth would still be on a collision course with annihilation. But at least he would have proven himself courageous enough to follow the crew through a BL hip, or he could open the BL hip right now in the hopes he could at least save Pearl before she attempts to land. But save her how? We're all dead either way. If I bring her back on board, we'll just head back to Earth with no confirmed news of salvation. Carl was distraught and angry with his inability to think clearly. He was supposed to be the one to keep a clear head and make firm decisions. Damn pinch, Carl thought. Carl opens the BL hip and tries to establish a connection with Pearl on the communicator. It's taking too long, Carl thinks. Suddenly, he can hear Pearl's breathing coming through. Pearl, how far are you from landfall? There's not much time. Carl shouts through the mic quickly. I'm within the gravitational pull now, Pearl says excitedly. Casper's on the ground and he's breathing without his suit. He says it's safe. Send a message home. Carl quickly uses the onboard computer to send a message back to Earth. This is ELCV-28. We've found a new home, location details included. Begin the evacuation process. Carl hits send and prays that was the right decision. He climbs into his suit and heads towards the BLH hip. This is it. He thinks. Carl gets through just as Pearl is making landfall. How was the descent? Carl asks. Fine. Not much in the way of clear landing areas. Pearl's responds. A lot of flora and fauna where I am. Flora and fauna? Carl says. That doesn't sound like the Earth I remember. Have you got a connection with Casper? No, his communicator cut off abruptly about a few seconds ago, Pearl said, concerned. I'm going to de-suit now. Carl tried to establish a connection with Casper, but nothing but static came through. How's the air? Carl asked. Clean. Weirdly clean, Pearl said, taking deep breaths. Carl was getting close to the inescapable gravitational pull of the planet. He soaked up the beauty of this vantage point. It looked like Earth, green land and sun and oceans. Carl couldn't contain his excitement, but something was different. Carl didn't recognize any of the continents. A scream pierced Carl's ears through his communicator. Then Pearl's voice came through panicked. Carl, turn back now. Get back to the ship and send another message to home. This is not Earth. This is not a safe planet. All that followed was screaming, the sounds of bones crunching, and a strange, savage, terrifying, deep roar. Carl checked the altimeter on his suit. Now entering inescapable gravity. Nature's the bomb. Landon's phone pinged again, disturbing the peaceful mountain hiking path. Woodrow Alfredson's right eye twitched from the tension building up in his body. It grew like static electricity in the air. Will you turn that damn thing off? This is a relaxing father-son hike. It's hard to enjoy the beauty of nature with your mobile beeping like a bomb. Shh, this is important. Tensions are escalating and he acted without thinking. He'd been absent for most of Landon's upbringing, gone in the mornings and evenings. He was missing most weekends, and even when he was present, he was tense and exhausted. But what kind of a father would he be if he allowed his teenage kid to silence him with a shh? It was never too late to start acting like a dad. Woodrow grabbed his son's phone, hateful device, and hurled it down the mountainside. The black rectangle clattered and crashed and banged along the rocks. Its screen shattered. Bits of computer chips and internal wiring flew away as it spiraled to its death. Dad, what? Enough. Landon recoiled, eyes wide. He stepped backwards and tripped over a stone. He landed on his backside with a winded grunt. Woodrow inhaled through his clenched teeth. He wanted what was best for his son. And that involved working long hours to ensure that Landon never wanted for anything. But now, with the military contract signed and sealed, money was no longer a problem. Woodrow could now spend some quality time with his boy. The problem was that he'd left it a bit late, and Landon no longer cared whether his dad did anything with him. So Woodrow needed to find a way to crack through Landon's "I don't give a damn" veneer. No more. This is you and me time. I know I haven't been around much, son, but you should know I only ever did it all for you. I worked such long, long hours to give you everything you needed, to bring us to this point where we can enjoy this moment, right here, right now, on top of the world, looking down upon the beauty of nature. We never have to worry about anything ever again. I'm finished with work, forever. So now let's enjoy it, okay? I've waited so long for this time, so let's finally enjoy it. Landon's shoulders drooped. The tension bled from his body. He nodded and raised his hands. He'd scraped some of the skin off his palms when he'd fallen, and tiny droplets of blood beaded there. Yeah, okay, Dad, okay. Woodrow offered his boy his hand and dusted him off once he was back upright. Good lad. I'll buy you a new one when we get back down. God knows we can afford it now. Hell, I can buy you 10 of them. Now come on, we're almost at the summit. Not much further now. The trees thinned the higher up they got. The going became more arduous, and the air became cleaner. The path took a turn and led them out to a plateau overlooking the lands. The mountain dropped away, affording them a stunning vista of their local geography. The nearby city, their home, sparkled like a teardrop. Woodrow was panting and sweating, his heart thudding like an out-of-control jackhammer. But Landon seemed none the worse for their little trek. The wonders of youth. He stood there with his hands on his hips, sweat around his pits, and gestured at the gorgeous views. He tried to speak, but both exhaustion and wonder stunned him into silence. Dad, Landon shook his head, unable to finish his words. Wow, nature is... He groped for the correct phrase. Nature's the bomb, Woodrow grinned. But that grin didn't have the chance to last long. An air raid siren looped through the air, slicing it in half. Birds erupted from the trees in a flock that blotted out the sun. The sinusoidal screech of doom rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell. It reverberated in their brains, their bowels, their bones. His smile faded, and he grunted like a caveman. A flash, brighter than 1,000 suns, lit up the sky. A faltering heartbeat later, the thud came. It rumbled deep into their hearts. A gunshot to the head of humanity. Woodrow gasped and raised his hands to protect his eyes. He staggered backwards and crashed into his son, who was doing the same. Landon reached out and grabbed for his father, scrunching up his shirt in a fist. His pale face no longer revealed the man he was becoming. Instead, he'd regressed into the small boy he'd once been. "Daddy, what is that?" Woodrow could not speak. His tongue felt heavy and lifeless in his mouth. Shards of ice poured into his veins, and the hairs on his neck prickled. He had the vertiginous sense of falling with no end. All he could get out was, "Oh my God, oh my God." The mushroom cloud rose on the nearby horizon. His stomach rolled over, drenched in acid. No wonder the military had rushed to sign the deal. They hadn't even lasted 12 hours after he jotted his John Hancock on the agreement. Woodrow lifted his thumb, and his insides shriveled when the cloud dwarfed it. The city beneath the mushroom cloud had vanished into rubble. An expanding ripple tore across the landscape from the point of detonation. Trees and buildings fell backwards as though they were props made of cardboard. The green earth exploded into radioactive dust. The landscape flattened. The blast sanded every feature and landmark away like an angle grinder. The soil rolled in a wave as though liquefied. Woodrow had wasted his son's childhood, working towards a comfortable future. But all that hard work had branched them off into a timeline where it came back to bite him on the behind. There was money in weapons manufacturing and war profiteering, and such investments would indeed pay off. But not, it seemed, in the direction one would hope. Well, there was no future now. Woodrow had not missed the irony. He threw up his hands. "Ah, for God's sake." The shockwave hit them, and all became a blinding white light, followed by darkness. The penultimate. It was a bit of a shock to see Sophie again at the door on a Thursday evening during the pre-news sitcoms, because, by all accounts, she was quite dead. Peter Lander distinctly recalled kissing her passionately, bittersweetly even, because it was their last kiss. and he knew it, even if she didn't. Right before he blew her brains out with his Colt python, he knew he was right, because Eileen made a big fuss. Why the hell did you kiss her? She's my wife. Not anymore. True. And given the insides of her skull, confettied all over the living room. And that later that week, they put the rest of the package 6 feet under. And then a day after that, they collected on the staggering life insurance. Yes, Sophie was dead. She had to be. And yet, "Hello, Peter," said Sophie, standing at their door. Said Peter. Dirt dribbled from her dress and hair, and actually, she was covered in dirt. No makeup, but her hair was done up, and frankly, she looked like she might just have gotten back from a rainy rugby match, which she for some reason played in her funeral dress. And maybe she was a little paler than usual. Oh, and she had that gaping hole in her forehead, of course. Sophie rolled her eyes, pushed past him, and muttered something about, "Why don't I let myself in?" Peter followed her to the kitchen, where Eileen was making herself a vodka cranberry. "Oh my God," said Eileen. Her tone was shocked, but not the kind of shocked you get when you see a dead person walking around, but rather when you see the wrong dead person walking around. Like when you're in line at the express checkout, but the old guy in front has more than 10 items, and it's noisy, and the AC doesn't work, and a greasy tween elbows you in the boob and doesn't even notice, much less apologize. "Peter, what the hell? She just showed up," he said with a shrug. "What do you want from me?" "Right," said Sophie. She placed a briefcase on the kitchen table, her lawyering briefcase from back when she was alive, and a lawyering, and unclasped it. "Gather round. Family meeting time." Peter and Eileen sat, though she huffed and crossed her arms and kept the vodka at hand. "Are you even part of our family anymore?" Eileen asked. Sophie glared her silent. Then she pulled out piles of papers, old yellow paper, covered in horrid red ink, all over the table. "Soph," Peter said. And then he winced. He never really knew how to broach deeper topics with her, which was maybe why their marriage was so-so. What's happened to you? Are you a ghost?" "She's obviously a zombie," Eileen snapped. "I told you to use the shotgun, but did you listen?" "No." Sophie drew herself up and sniffed. "I am not a ghost, Peter. Ghosts aren't real." Out of her briefcase, she pulled out, reverently, a ruby-red fountain pen. Except it wasn't merely ruby red, it was ruby, with a gold nib, and placed it gently beside her. "Neither am I anything so gauche as a zombie," Eileen pouted. "I am a revenant." Peter and Eileen shared a look. "What's a revenant?" he asked. "I'll put it this way. When I ran into the devil in hell, told you lawyers went to hell," Eileen said, sneering. Sophie cleared her throat. When I ran into the devil, I made a deal with him. He'd let me come back as an undead murder machine so that I could wreak unholy vengeance on those who wronged me. You know, tear you limb from limb, eat your heart, and drag your sorry soul back down with me. Kind of one last big hurrah in the world of the living. Peter gulped. Eileen dropped her glass, which wobbled on the table and spilled all over her lap. Thing is, Sophie continued, holding up a parchment covered in bloody writing, I've gone over this contract hundreds of times, and as soon as I kill you, I go back too. But not until. She took a couple fresher-looking sheets of yellow paper and slid them across the table, one each for Peter and Eileen. So, I'm willing to offer you a deal. Feel free to read over that. But the gist is, I don't murder you, and in exchange, I get to live here and get access to the millions from my life insurance policy. Peter looked at his paper and gulped. Is this written in blood? It's Lucifer ink, by Lucifer Inc., Sophie said. Then, with a distant look in her eyes and an unsubtle tremble, she added, Blood tends to boil down there. Oh, it is written on human leather, though. Peter and Eileen dropped their papers. What if we don't sign? Eileen asked. Then I murder you now and drag your soul down to hell. Can we just shoot you again? Peter asked. Technically, yes. But come on, Peter. Use your thinking brain. I'm already dead. Even if you managed to destroy my body by blowing it up or something, I'd just come right back, like some cheesy slasher flick. And the neighbors would probably complain about the noise. Oh, Peter and Eileen held quiet counsel for just a moment, wiggling their eyebrows and making meaningful expressions at each other. Of course, since Sophie knew them both intimately, one as a husband and the other also as a mistress, their secret language was no secret to her. She lay her ruby pen before them. What kind of pen is that? Asked Eileen. A pen par excellence. The pen ultimate. The devil's very own quill. Utterly binding on a soul level. I might have swiped it from his desk. What? Don't look at me like that. It's not like I can possibly get into even more trouble. What choice did they have? They signed. Then for a second, they shimmered in a red glow and experienced a pang of bowel distress. And it was done. And Sophie moved back into the house she paid for. Her old firm wouldn't take her back when she called. No offense, Soph. And I mean that. You were one of the best, for sure. It's just, people already see us as ghoulish. And if we brought you back, well, it'd no longer be libel, would it? So she plopped herself down on the living room couch, right in the middle, so Peter and Eileen couldn't cuddle up on it while watching a nice rom-com or something. Not that they watched rom-coms, because Sophie had control of the remote, and she binged trashy reality TV 24 hours a day. Maybe someone else would want to watch something, Eileen said. Maybe someone else should get a job and buy the TV, Sophie snapped. And 24 hours a day really was 24 hours a day, since Sophie didn't sleep. "You mind turning that down at night?" Peter asked, after he caught himself humming a reality theme song in the shower. "It's just, I can't sleep." "Yes, Peter," said Sophie. "I do mind." And then she cranked the volume up. The only thing that competed with the blaring TV was the shrill ding of the doorbell, going off like clockwork. Also, at all hours of the day. Having some free time, for perhaps the first time in her life, Sophie crawled the online shopping sites and splurged on whatever caught her eye. After all, her life insurance money was as much hers as anyone else's. And given this was her retirement, she had nothing to save for. The lack of responsibility felt liberating. The living room was soon filled with unread books, unworn clothes, unwatched movies, unexercised workout machines, and uneaten chocolate. Somewhere, she even found a life-size alabaster unicorn, whose horn scratched up the low ceiling. And because she refused to budge from the couch, muttering something about the sentimental value of it being the place her brain was ejected, it fell to Peter and Eileen to get the deliveries. It was exhausting in their spare moments. Peter and Eileen mostly stuck to the kitchen, where the blaring TV was at least a little muted. Having company over was difficult, because all their friends understandably kept bringing up the Sophie situation. And frankly, it was getting embarrassing explaining themselves over and over, and stressing that the living room was Sophie's room, and so it was best to leave it be. Eileen hit the bottle increasingly hard, and Peter took up smoking again. Easy, since Sophie no longer nagged him about it. "This isn't working for me," Eileen said one night. Peter nodded. "This isn't how I pictured our early retirement." Peter nodded again. "Are you listening to me?" "Christ, yes. What do you want from me?" "I want the life of luxury I was promised. I want to be able to host our friends with swanky parties." She pouted. "I want my yacht." Peter rolled his eyes. "Don't you dare," he sighed and massaged the bridge of his nose. "It's not ideal, is it? What can we do? I thought we were rid of her. Be nice." "No," said Eileen. "I'm sick of this. I wish we never signed that stupid contract." "Well, she would have murdered us. And, you know, the whole hell thing. Whatever." Then Eileen's eyes lit up. "Hey, maybe there's a loophole. Where's the contract?" Stealing Sophie's briefcase wasn't too hard, what with the TV blaring, and her attention focused entirely on the very real antics of the very real people on display. They brought it back to the kitchen for some privacy and started going through the papers. Sophie's contract with the devil was huge. It took them a solid week to go through it. A week made all the harder by the constant interruptions from deliveries. But finally, on Friday, they hit on something. Footnote 28397, Peter read. Note that the revenant has license to seek revenge on exactly one former aggressor. As soon as such an aggressor is slain, the revenant contract is concluded, and both souls become the property of Lucifer Inc. Note that collateral damage is permitted. What's that mean? Eileen asked. I'm reading. Hold on. Basically, if she blows us up or something, that's fine too. The contract's done when one of us dies, but there's no penalty, I guess, if we're both dead. Super. So very encouraging. Shh. Wait. There's more. Peter adjusted his glasses and took a drag on his cigarette. Note also that the contract will be concluded if any of the aggressors should die by any means, whether caused by the revenant or not. This includes, but is not limited to, traffic accidents, war, acts of God, peanut butter, old age, or being murdered by someone else. Said Eileen, setting her drink down. Said Peter. What do you suppose that means? I guess, Eileen hedged, if one of us were to die, then... Peter set his cigarette down on the table. He locked eyes with Eileen, and neither blinked, as an ad for an energy drink roared in the background. At once, she flew at the counter, and he dived for the pantry. And they both kicked over their kitchen table. Eileen grabbed the first things available to her, a cutting board covered in raw, soon-to-be schnitzels, and a gory meat tenderizer. She flung the floppy meat patties across the room and roared, hoisting her tenderizer into the air. And then, with a shriek, brought her cutting board up, just in time to block the worst of a volley of canned pinto beans. Peter charged her with a battle cry, holding a jumbo can of tomato juice with both hands. He leapt at her, right as she swung. Her tenderizer savaged his temple, but he tackled her. I think we should see other people, he roared, bringing his can of tomato juice down and down again. Eileen screamed, desperately blocking with her cutting board and flailing her face tenderizer, until it finally connected with his jaw. It was enough for her to push him off and then roll on top. And now Peter was on the defensive. It's not you, it's me, she cried. And each time her weapon came down, torrents of blood, or tomato, it was hard to tell, splattered everything. They rolled again when Peter was able to get a hold of a raw schnitzel and shove it into her face. And then again, when she managed to can opener his ear. And on it went, until they both flopped onto the kitchen floor, gasping for breath, covered in cuts and bruises and meat. Truce, he wheezed. Yeah, she managed, and then coughed. I thought killing was supposed to get easier after the first one. Hey, do you smell that? Eileen sniffed. Is something burning? Laboriously, they both sat up and found their kitchen to be on fire. The worst of the blaze was their table, which had been covered in Sophie's dry old contracts, Eileen's liquor, and Peter's lit cigarette. "Aw, hell," he muttered as the flames drew closer. Then they both screamed for help. Sophie ignored them at first, because their drama was just too much, and nowhere near as interesting as TV. But it grated on her enough that she finally rose off the couch. By then, the kitchen was a conflagration, with nary any raw meat in sight, neither schnitzel nor Peter and Eileen. "Damn it," she said, planting her hands on her hips. "You two are just the worst." And then she exploded into a cloud of sulfur and flame, and the house burned down. Aunt Cass, if I felt anything for the man sitting across from me at the dinner table, it would have been an incredibly romantic evening. The restaurant was dimly lit. We'd each had 2 glasses of red wine. There was a string quartet playing a lovely tune at the center of the dining room. And Samuel looked handsome that night. Well, for him. His suit was a size too big, and he had gotten a weird haircut that week. But he'd never looked better. "Champagne?" he asked me. Dear God, I thought to myself. He did not put the ring in a champagne glass. 3 minutes later, our waiter set a champagne glass down in front of me with a sparkling diamond ring at the bottom of the glass. I squealed and smiled at Samuel. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. I kissed him, because that's what you do when you accept a marriage proposal. I slipped the ring on my finger. I did not want to, and would not marry this man. But my squeal of enthusiasm was real. I was thrilled to be his fiancée at last. Jack, a year ago, I received a different marriage proposal from a man who is Samuel's opposite in every way. Theodore is handsome, clever, ambitious, and can fill out a suit. We met at the magazine where I'd been working as an associate editor for 5 years. He started with us as a weekly humor columnist, and we began dating almost immediately. I was hesitant at first. I had avoided romantic entanglements ever since an incident during my junior year of college. Eventually, Theodore's small gestures won me over, saving the Times crossword for me and laying it on my desk every morning, surprising me with coffee from my favorite place in the village. Once I agreed to a first date, dinner at Bistro. I fell hard and fast. I had never been in love like that before. I couldn't wait to open my eyes and see him beside me every morning. And there was no moment of my life, exhilarating or devastating, that I didn't want to share with him. I did try to stop. I tried to keep things casual, suggesting that best friends with benefits could be an option for us. Theodore just laughed at me, his blue eyes sparkling. It was impossible. We were clearly meant to be more than friends. The inevitable was drawing closer and closer. When Theodore suggested dinner at Bistro on the 2nd anniversary of our first date, I started to panic. Aunt Cass's voice echoing in the back of my head. I tried everything I could to cancel our anniversary dinner. I blamed a family commitment, but it turned out that Theodore had gone to my parents to ask for their blessing. So that plan failed. I told Theodore I had a deadline at work, but the editorial staff was in the loop and had cleared my schedule for the weekend. The night of the bistro dinner, we left straight from the office. Theodore went downstairs ahead of me to get a cab, and I looked frantically around my office for a reason to stay. "Do I have any messages?" I asked my assistant. Samuel shook his head, giving me a dopey grin. "None." "Check. The thing you need to understand is that I desperately wanted to marry Theodore. Everything about our relationship was amazing. The sex, the conversations, the unconditional emotional support. Everything. An engagement, however, was out of the question. When we got to bistro, Theodore had reserved a quiet table in the corner. I observed all the small details, the music, the lighting, the flowers, and I suddenly felt dizzy, like I needed to sit down. Theodore pulled out the chair for me to sit. Yet another sweet and small romantic gesture that made me love him even more. "I can't marry you," I exclaimed. I'd never seen a person's face crumple like that. He was 31 years old, and he looked like a distraught toddler. Theodore let go of the back of my chair and started to back away from the table silently. "No," I said, seizing his hand. "You have to let me explain why." That's when I told him about Aunt Cass. "Chakak, it's really hard to explain, Aunt Cass. Our family was Italian, passionate, loud, and full of characters. An aunt who made racist comments after 3 glasses of wine. The cousin who would always end up passed out around a table. And Aunt Cass, who everyone said could predict the future. It supposedly started when she was a kid. Her mom asked her about having a play date with a friend, and 5-year-old Cass said she couldn't go because of Uncle Joey's funeral. Uncle Joey, healthy as a horse, collapsed and died of an aneurysm 2 days later. After that, her predictions were a regular occurrence. Sometimes, Aunt Cass delivered warnings, attempting to help family members avoid a negative consequence, like when she warned my oldest cousin, Mia, not to go to a school dance, or she'd risk a grave injury. Mia stayed home. The limo her friends rented was in a horrible accident, and 3 kids ended up in the hospital. Other times, Cass's predictions were more definitive, unavoidable, like when she told her cousin Freddie that he was about to be fired. He was furious, stormed away from the Sunday dinner table, called her a liar. Yet when his boss called him into her office 2 days later to give him the bad news, no one in our family, not even Freddie, was surprised. It was accepted family lore that Cass's predictions were accurate. For that reason, I did my best to avoid her. Occasionally, her predictions were positive, like when she told my sister Tori that she'd get into Juilliard. But for the most part, they were gloomy and eerie, words that would haunt you every moment until the prophecy was fulfilled. Aunt Cass tended to make her predictions in private conversations during our weekly Sunday dinners at Nonna's house, so I stuck with my sisters during those evenings. I did my best to never be on my own and in Cass's eye line. Then one night, during my junior year of college, we were watching TV in Nonna's den, and my little sister stole my dessert. Just snatched up my chocolate chip cannoli with a wicked grin on her face. I whacked her in the arm and retreated to the kitchen to get a new one. It happened so fast. There Aunt Cass was, smiling at me as she brewed the coffee. And all of a sudden, she was speaking. "You'll have 3 men in your life," she said casually. I froze, one hand about to select a new dessert. Was this how it happened? Aunt Cass had cornered my sister Isabella last month to tell her that she'd never be a movie star, but Isabella hadn't mentioned such an informal tone. The first one will break your heart. The second man will become your fiancé, but will die before you can marry. The third will be your happily ever after, Aunt Cass continued. She handed me a napkin and a paper plate for my cannoli. Aunt Cass, I wasn't typically speechless. I had goosebumps on my arms and legs. She left the room, and I heard her start talking to my Nonna about a doctor's appointment she was taking her to the next day. Aunt Cass had delivered her prediction, and now she was ready to return to small talk. I didn't tell anyone. I had a boyfriend at the time. We'd been dating for 3 years, and we talked about marriage and kids. 6 months after Aunt Cass's prediction, I caught him cheating with my best friend. It was upsetting, but I wasn't surprised. Chag. This was the story I told Theodore that night at Bistro. The look he gave me afterward was scornful. "Gia, you can't possibly believe that nonsense," he said. I was crushed. Theodore had never looked at me like that before, with something close to contempt. He didn't know what it felt like to be in my family and watch impossible things occur and know that disbelief did nothing. I just love you too much to risk it," I exclaimed. My eyes filled with tears. I did love him. I loved Theodore with a strength of feeling I'd never experienced before. The second man will become your fiancé, but will die before you can marry. If he died, I would want to die as well. The thought of losing him was too much to bear. He stood there, absorbing the information, and I could see a shift in his expression. I was becoming a different person in his eyes. A kook, a nut job, someone not serious or stable enough to love and marry. It was infuriating that Aunt Cass had done this to me. I was 29 years old, and her prophecy had been haunting me for a decade. I avoided intimacy. I resigned myself to a lonely life. I was scared of never finding someone to love, and equally afraid that when I did, they would die, and it would somehow be my fault. Enough. A small voice inside my head pushed Aunt Cass out, and I felt calm and resolute for the first time in weeks. "It's really nothing," I said, striving to make my voice sound conversational. "It's just a hard thing to shake, and I've been—" I paused, sensing it would give my next words more impact. "I've been lied to my entire life." It was as if a light that had flickered out reignited in Theodore's eyes. He looked at me hopefully. "Give me a little time," I said to him. "I just need to work it all out. Someday, maybe, I'd be able to give him a different answer." Our co-workers were shocked when I started dating my assistant, Samuel, a week later. He had always had a crush on me. He was young, impressionable, sweet, dopey. It was refreshing to be with him. Everything with Theodore had been so intense, and my relationship with Samuel was easy. We had to transfer him, of course, for HR purposes, and he ended up as the assistant to the editor in the office next door to Theodore. It was challenging, watching Theodore from afar for all those months. I watched him, watching me and Samuel, and I wished I could whisper what I was really thinking into his ear. It was simple to encourage a quick engagement and wedding. From the beginning, I told Samuel that I wanted to wait until after marriage for us to have sex, and he obliged. I blamed my Italian Catholic upbringing, and he was supportive. The abstinence was part of my plan to keep us moving forward. Nothing encourages a man to speed up a wedding date like a vow of chastity. After I accepted Samuel's proposal, after we told our families and started making plans for a wedding, after we set a date that was just 6 months away, I waited. It was agony. Theodore started to date. I couldn't invest in wedding planning with any enthusiasm when I knew the event wouldn't actually occur. My mother adored Samuel, who was happy to help with choices and errands, and they planned happily together, while I pretended to be busy at work. I was at the office late one night when Theodore caught me by the hand as I was leaving. "What are you doing?" he asked me. "I thought you just needed time." I walked away. He would understand soon enough. 3 weeks before the wedding, I started to panic. 3 days before the wedding, Samuel took me to dinner at the restaurant where he'd proposed. It was the last time we'd see each other alone before the wedding. He had a bachelor party the next evening, and I had a bachelorette, and then we'd have the rehearsal dinner. It was so sweet that he'd thought, just as Theodore had, to bring me back to a restaurant where we'd had a beautiful memory. It seemed I was destined to have boyfriends who excelled at romance. I didn't feel romanced. I was terrified. I was waking up screaming at night, and I felt tremors in my hands and feet periodically throughout the day. I couldn't eat. I knew what true love was. I'd had it with Theodore. A marriage with Samuel would be devastating for me after the years I'd spent as Theodore's lover. And if the wedding actually happened, well, my parents would throw a wild fit if I even mentioned the word divorce to them. I needed to end it. We took a walk through the park after dinner, and then we went up to the roof deck at the top of my apartment building. It was a cool evening. I walked over to the edge of the roof to stand at the railing. The building was 20 stories tall. I felt Samuel wrap his arms around me, rubbing my bare arms to keep me warm. "Do you want my jacket?" he asked. "No," I said. Then I seized his arm and swung him forward. I watched him fall 20 stories to the street. It occurred to me during the memorial service that everyone in attendance would have been at our wedding. The death was ruled an accident by the authorities. No one had seen Samuel fall. After years of feeling like I lived beneath an unlucky star, things were working out in my favor. Aunt Cass hugged me tightly at the funeral. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," she said, crying and whispering so that only I could hear. "I hate when I'm right about these things." I hugged her back and wished that I could thank her for saving me from a worser fate. There was no way to know if I could trust her, though. The plan wasn't always supposed to be this. For weeks, I'd waited for some accidental calamity to befall Samuel. I would have grieved it. He was only 28 years old. But I wouldn't have had to resort to what I did. It simply wasn't fair. The way Aunt Cass's predictions ruined lives, ended lives. After everything was over, the funeral, the memorial service, I called Theodore and asked him to dinner. His voice sounded perplexed. "I've been thinking about you," he said. "I'm so sorry about what happened." It had been about a year since I'd rejected his proposal. "It was terrible," I said quietly. "He was so young." Theodore was silent for a few moments. I wished that he was in the room with me, that I could look at his face and guess what he was thinking. "And you're calling to ask me to dinner?" he asked slowly. "Things are different now," I said. "Bistro, 7 p.m. There was another beat of silence. "I'll pick you up at 6:30 p.m., he said. We hung up, and I frowned. He didn't sound excited. But then, I'd broken his heart a year ago, and it might take time for things to mend. When I opened the door at 6:30 p.m., 2 uniformed police officers were waiting to patiently explain to me about the footage that had been found on a neighbor's security camera and the motive that had been revealed to them by the love of my life. I used my phone call to reach Theodore. "How could you do this?" I asked him. I didn't even recognize my own voice. It was high-pitched, wild, and frantic. "Who's going to be my happily ever after?" "I don't know," he said coldly. "Maybe the lady in the cell next door." He slammed down the phone. That was ludicrous, I thought to myself. Aunt Cass's prediction had clearly stated that there would be 3 men in my life. I held the phone to my ear, briefly after he hung up. I needed a moment to breathe. All I could think about was Aunt Cass, with her words that had haunted me for the past 10 years. The woman was insane. She ruined lives. C-section, scar, I can pack all of my belongings and my son's in under 30 minutes. I attribute part of this to my military kid upbringing. My parents liked to live the minimalist lifestyle. They'd only put a few decorations up here and there. And while I hated seeing bare walls on each house or apartment we lived in, I definitely see the appeal now. My son is homeschooled because it is easier to do that than explain to his teachers why we move so often. And before you ask, it's not because of the military. Granted, my son is only in first grade, so I'm finding the material relatively easy to teach. But I'm sure in a few years, it'll get hairy. My son, Carter, is always a good sport about leaving. He may not fully understand why at times, but he's too young for me to tell the whole story, and I don't want to burden him with that right now. This has been the longest we've stayed in one place. It's almost been 8 months now, which I've found is long enough for Carter to make friends, and I loved and hated that at the same time. Not at the thought of him making friends, but the inevitable conversation I'm going to have with him when the time comes to leave. He took the last move a little hard, and frankly, I did too. I moved us to the West Coast, a place I had always wanted to live since I was little, but never got the chance to. I wanted Carter to breathe in the saltiness of the seawater, put his feet in the sand, and build sand castles. I wanted him to experience what it was like to just be a kid for once, and hopefully put down roots. And he got to do that, but only for a measly 4 weeks. Now, living in dreary Seattle, a place I never wanted to move because of its constant gloominess and downpouring rain, is the place we get to call home. Well, at least until she finds us again. And I hope, for Carter's sake, she won't. I supposed I should now tell you the story of why we are running. On the day that I turned 38, I realized how quickly my biological clock was ticking. I had 2 failed marriages at that point, and I was desperate to have my own child. I did a few rounds of IVF using a sperm donor, and when I received countless negative pregnancy tests, my hope dwindled, and so did my bank account. I felt hopeless until my sister volunteered to carry my child for me and be my surrogate. I was surprised to say in the least, considering we had a rocky relationship over the years and rarely saw eye to eye. But when she offered to be my surrogate, it was as though we had a clean slate. Though I'll admit at times that I was jealous that she could be pregnant while I couldn't. But I knew without her, I wouldn't be having a child. I was just thankful she was doing this for me. Her labor was horrendous. She pushed and pushed for hours and wanted nothing more than a natural home birth. The home birth was one she planned for as soon as she found out she was pregnant. Instead, she was taken to the hospital for an emergency C-section. I held her hand the entire time, throughout the ride in the ambulance and to the surgery. I felt as though I had taken a breath for the first time when I heard his cry. When he was set in my arms instead of hers, I watched her joyous expression turn to envy. As she laid in the hospital bed, recovering, she stared at him in the bassinet before turning to me. "Can I name him?" My eyes flickered towards her, her mouth agape as she gave me a sweet smile. "Name him?" I asked, still in awe. "Yeah, I had a whole list of names while I was pregnant, and now that I've seen him, I have the perfect name." She paused, waiting for my reaction. I raised my eyebrow, and she replied, "Elliot." Excitement was written all over her face as soon as she said it. While I didn't hate the name, I have always wanted to name my son Carter. There were no words to explain how grateful I was that she did this for me. But I couldn't just give up the name that I've been wanting to use for years. Carter Elliott Smith. Her face dimmed when I said this. "So you won't use Elliot as his first name?" I shook my head, and she plastered on a fake smile, one that I thought was real at the time. "I love it." When I left to go to the bathroom, I thought I heard her call him Elliot, but I didn't know if I was just being paranoid and hearing things, so I brushed it off. The first couple months were hard, way harder than I was expecting. He was colicky, barely sleeping, and therefore neither did I. My sister was more than helpful, and even started living in my guest room to help with those late-night feeds and anything else I needed. It was perfect until I woke up one morning and they were gone. It took me almost a week to find them, and that was only because my mom managed to trap them at her house. My mom knew that she took him as her own when she called him Elliot. Now, looking back at it, I wish I never would have taken her up on her offer. Not that I don't love my son, but I don't love having to move every time she discovers where we live. I hoped she would move on by now, but she's reminded of Carter anytime she glances down at her C-section scar. I heard feet scuffle in the hallway, and my breath hitches every time I hear the sound of shoes close to our door. Not knowing whose they were, I walked over to the door and stood on my tiptoes. She's standing right in front of the door, as if she knows I'm standing behind it. She smiles that sinister smile of hers and says, "You can't run forever." A decently modest proposal. "Hey you. Yes, you, reading this story. Don't worry, this isn't some piece of meta-fiction. I'm dictating what I say to a gracious volunteer who will post it for me. I've got an offer for you. And no, not like a door-to-door salesman peddling dull kitchen knives or what have you. You see, my offer is as genuine as a baby's first laugh. My name is Donald Basemore Cooper. Quite a mouthful, I know. My friends call me Donnie, DB, Coop, Basement, and so on. Take your pick. They're like paint samples. But the people I do business with? Oh, they call me a lifesaver. Believe it or not, old Donnie here knows a thing or two about you. I'd wager 9 out of 10 of the people reading this are sitting down. Maybe you're lucky, number 10 though, standing up at work, browsing your phone, blessed enough to have clicked this offer. Maybe your job doesn't let you sit down like a cashier or that guy who takes the stubs off movie tickets. Regardless, whether you're sitting or standing, you'll realize that your feet probably hurt. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. Maybe sitting down is just a temporary oasis from the desert of swollen soles and pained pinky toes. But we've all been there. We all know what it's like to have our dogs barking. Think about it. From the moment you were born, your mommy or your daddy had a countdown going for the day you'd take your first steps. Maybe they even filmed it, a joyous occasion to look back on. But was it really? Because after that, you might have found walking fun for a year or two. Then you might have graduated to running, sweating off the sugar highs you'd get from your candies and such. But at some point, I'm confident walking and running just became, vanilla, plain and simple, boring even. Hell, I'm taking it one proverbial step further and guessing it's just plain tiring too. Now, as an adult, say you can't find a parking space close to where you need to go. Now you gotta walk. Or maybe the bus station isn't that close to where you work. We haven't exactly designed cities around those of us without cars. Maybe your job keeps you on your toes. Go run this. Go clean this. Go serve that table of assholes their food, knowing they won't tip you. More walking, and even if you try and relax on a weekend, guess what? How long can you last until you go shopping at a store, or even a mega shopping center, floor after floor, dedicated to glorious capitalism, a shrine to enjoyment and consumerism? But your feet will have hell to pay. And I know I can hear some of you thinking to yourselves, but Donnie, I like to walk, run, and jog. Hell, I eat marathons for breakfast. I hear you. I promise you still gotta listen to my offer. You see, why do we do those things? If you ask me, it boils down to 3 different reasons. First reason, maybe you like an early morning stroll through the woods because you gotta de-stress. It's calming, serene, reminds you of your mama's womb. I get that. But it can't be the only way you know how to de-stress. I'm sure your buddies, the bed and the couch, would like to chime in and remind you how relaxing they are. And if you still want to be in nature, watch a bird or two. Park benches are right there, singing a siren song to rest your feet. Second reason, weight loss. You want to be sexy. You want to look thin. You gotta shave those pounds off of you. But I'm sorry to say, it's really all a sham. Society made up these rules as to who counts as hot, who gets to be on the big screens and such. They want you to look thin because there's more money for them in looking thin. Exercise machines, designer clothes, beauty products, all that costs way more than a bag of chips and cookie dough, if you know what I'm saying. And then they have the gall to make food so tasty, yet so fattening, to keep this endless cycle going. You pay money to get thin, only to pay money to get fattened again. That's the secret to beauty. It's just money wearing a mask. Don't fall for it. Live how you want. Don't worry about running to get thin. Reason the third. Maybe you run for sport. You know, it happens. You could have had a lazy eye and couldn't hit or throw a ball right. But boy, howdy, you sure could run like hell in a straight line. Now, your pal Coop here wasn't much of an athlete. Most of my running came from evading the school bullies, who are now, hopefully, adult has-beens and burnouts. But that spirit of competition is a wonderful thing. It's food for the heart and soul. But it won't last. Sooner or later, your body gives out, and you'll just be yearning for the glory days, like a college alum still visiting their frat house on homecoming. You can't run forever, so you see where I'm coming from now? Almost everyone reading this declaration of mine is going to tragically fall victim to one day being so pained, so hurt, so egregiously tired, all from walking. Biologically speaking, we aren't even designed to be standing up straight for so long. Our spines are an affront to God, if anything. So, what do? What is Mr. Basemore Cooper here leading up to? What is my offer to you, my dear reader? Well, let me tell you a story. Growing up, my grandfather, or my Boompa, as I called him, lived on his own. He'd come visit me, walking up the 3 stone steps to my house, back and knee pains the whole time. Of course, I didn't know at the time how much he hurt. He was just Boompa to me, so friendly, so kind, bringing over an apple or 2 to help keep the doctor away for me, you know? As a kid, I'd run around the house or the yard, trying to play with Boompa, never realizing how he struggled to catch up. Then, inside, I'd jump on his lap as he sought relief on our couch. He's the one who taught me my dogs are barking instead of saying my feet hurt. Hell, he'd put a spin on it with the whole pound is a barking Donnie, and then he'd leave to go home to his apartment, up several flights of stairs, all by himself. and I'd beg him to stay. Please, Boompa, I want to play every day. And I'd wonder why my parents were just letting him go off by himself. In retrospect, it's even worse. They had to have known his legs were hurting, but they basically kicked him out into the cold every time he finished visiting. Why couldn't Boompa just live with us? Would it really have been that hard? Don't you get ahead of yourselves, dear readers. There isn't some skeleton in Boompa's closet. No sins of the grandfather. No wicked reason why baby Donald couldn't see him every day. The real reason? Independence. As long as he could walk, he insisted on taking care of himself, living on his own, and thus seeing me only a dozen times a year. Tragic, right? Your hearts must be breaking. Boo-hoo for Donnie. Nah, I should get that I was still lucky to even have Boompa. But you know who wasn't lucky? Boompa. Knees sore, feet aching. A lifetime of walking amounting to chronic pain. It really shouldn't be a surprise that he couldn't cross the street at a normal speed. So if you think about the number of stupid people combined with the number of impatient people in this country, it was really only a matter of time. Boompa couldn't possibly react fast enough to that car. Don't grab your tissues and start weeping. He lived. It's actually funny how tires crushing your bones, grinding your flesh, and spilling your blood across the pavement isn't enough to kill you sometimes. I wonder if Boompa found it funny too, lying there, waiting for the ambulance, dragging himself away from the mangled remains of his legs. Just a clean cut, the kind that would make a butcher blush with how precise it was. Just like that. No more legs and feet to hurt. Just like that. Boompa was at home. My home. To live with us. I could talk to him all day. My parents would take care of him, and he'd never have to walk again in his wheelchair. I couldn't be happier that he lived out the last few years of his life with us, fully provided for and loved. I'm sure he'd agree. I'll have to ask him when I go to heaven. And we could have had all that for longer if he had just gotten rid of his legs sooner. Don't you think? What I'm proposing is a free service, all done by me on the house, to give yourself the same kind of life Boompa had at the end. Fully taken care of, free from the stress of walking. You'll find new ways to relax, new games to play to pass the time, and losing weight? Well, a leg is a little under a fifth of your weight, so losing both? You're talking upwards of 50 pounds off, all at once, way more efficient that exercise ever could be. Come on. Working out is hell. All the sweat and the pains and finding time to do it. I'm telling you, my offer is way better than that. You might be hesitant, because you don't have a spare wheelchair lying around. No worries. Part of the service is that I'll help you procure one suited just to your needs. What about housing? Making sure you can still move around. Your boy Donnie is right here. We can rearrange your house to be a more wheelchair-friendly space. What's that? Your job? Going out in public? Right now, I'm working on pushing the government to pass legislature to increase disability pay. Most public places have to be wheelchair accessible already, but with an increase to monthly payments, you'll have more than enough free money to use on both living and entertainment. You'll see, it really won't be a big deal to use ride-sharing services once you have the money from selling your car. How is the procedure done? Well, there are too many hoops to jump through to doing this in a hospital. God forbid us red-blooded Americans exercising the freedom we've been promised. I'll gladly come to your house instead. Just give me your address, and we'll pick a time that works best for you. Maybe you want the kids out of the house. Maybe you've been looking for an excuse to get off of work on a Monday. Certainly won't be going back to that job after we're done. I've got my bag of tools with me here. We've got some chloroform here, a new set of rags, some ropes too. I find it decreases the squirming if you happen to wake up. You don't have to worry about carpet stains either. I'll throw down a tarp. We could even set you up in bed for maximum comfort as well. Then you've got your choice of tool. The chainsaw is a wonderful choice for those horror fanatics out there. Plus, the noise will drown out any screaming that might occur. Again, if you wake up. But maybe you want quick and painless, or at least as painless as possible. That's where the elegant Japanese katana comes in, fully capable of slicing through bone. Maybe you want to savor the moment you give into a lifetime of relaxation and sitting. Or maybe you find your jollies from a little bit of pain here and there. No judgment here. But I've still got my trusty hacksaw here, still good to go from the first time I did this procedure. Now the forums will tell you that a bone saw might cut better, but ignore that hogwash. With enough elbow grease and a can-do attitude, my hacksaw and I will easily get your legs on a one-way trip to Aruba. Never to bother you again. Don't you worry a hair on your pretty head. I know what I'm doing here. It's not my first rodeo. I've had plenty of satisfied customers in the past. It does take a little convincing, but if you met me in person, my pearly white smile would knock your socks off. Be warned, ladies, I'm quite the charmer. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up chit-chatting mid-procedure too. Why, yes, I'd love to take you out to dinner in your fine new wheelchair this Friday. I'll hold the door open for you and make sure you get home safe before I lift you and tuck you into bed. Nice and snug. Now, In full honesty, not everyone is fully on board with this procedure yet. But I really am doing people a huge favor here. The couple of times they hesitated to say yes didn't stop me from grabbing the old chloroform here. I remember this one gentleman, surely an upstanding and strong man, didn't hesitate to start crying and begging me to stop once he was tied down. Those tears reminded me a lot of myself when I used to cry when Boompa left. Oh, how things got better for me. And soon they'd get better for him too. In fact, this young gentleman typing this all out is my latest customer. You see, I'm not the best with computers, so we cut a deal. He could keep one of his legs if he helped me spread my word far and wide. So here we are. If only you could see him hobble, a little tear in his eye. There won't be any tears once he moves into his wheelchair, with my help, of course. I'm not a monster, after all. So folks, if you're interested in changing your life for the better, taking a stand against pain by sitting down permanently, then I'm your man. For Donald Basemore Cooper, call 555-NO-LEGS for me. You want to be free? Call your pal DB and make sure you hold on to those legs once they're off you, because I've got a great home recipe to share with you in the kitchen. General, my eyes fly open like I'm waking from the dead. I start up, tossing aside the blanket that had been tangled around my legs. Something woke me up. I kick dirty laundry out of the way and shift my body to sitting up, head swimming. The sunlight is too bright in the room, and I find myself squinting around. When I lean forward, my phone tumbles off my lap, hits the edge of the coffee table, and clatters to the floor. I wince. Shh! I hiss at it. Why is that so loud? It echoes through the whole house. I look down at the dark phone, way far away on the floor, and can't convince my arms to swing down to grab it. What's the point? So I can open it up and do what? I breathe in, smelling the stale smell of the old blankets wrapped around me in a cocoon. And because there's nothing better to do, breathe out again. I can feel stiffness in my stomach from the surgery, the stitches stretching with my skin. I'm hungry. I should haul myself to my feet, drag myself into the kitchen, and find something to eat. I try to imagine doing all of that, standing up, moving, opening the fridge, getting out ingredients, putting things in a bowl. I swing my head to the right. There's my water bottle. I can drink some water. I try to force my brain to imagine telling my husband, when he gets home from work, what I did today. I drank some water from my water bottle. I breathed in, and I breathed back out. I decided to keep breathing in and keep breathing out, because it was easier than not doing that. I look down at my right arm, and because it would be embarrassing if I can't even manage that, I lift my arm, pick up my water bottle with fingers made of lead and swallow some water. I have been back from the hospital almost a week after my ordeal, and somehow swallowing water is still the most I can manage. The TV is on, and there's a very serious news lady droning on. She's talking about the spread of the virus, and there's a map with splotches of red. I don't want to listen to this, to see the red slowly seeping into our state, getting closer and closer to us. I want it to be quiet. She's talking so loud, she needs to be quiet. But I don't know where the remote is, and I don't know if I can remember which buttons to press. I lean my head back and think about going back to sleep. But if I go back to sleep, at some point I'll be woken up again. And then what? Once, I liked waking up in the morning, greeting the fresh world and whatever the day held. Now, after what happened, when my eyes open, I just wonder when I can shut them again. I don't have to feel hungry when I'm sleeping, and don't have to worry about finding something to eat. Thump. There's a thump on the porch steps. My eyes trace past the cluttered living room, past the TV, out the window, and as he moves, I catch a glimpse of him. There's a zombie climbing the porch steps. I start to stand. Sharp pain shoots through my stomach. I stiffen and pause. Is that pain new? I don't remember it from yesterday. I leverage with my arms, stiff and sore, and haul myself to my feet. I kick at one sock that's slowly coming off my foot and shuffle around the pile of laundry to get to the window. Surely I saw something else. Right? I'm sure I didn't see a zombie. The lady on the news is saying to be very, very careful. She's saying that the virus spreads not just from the bite, but that it's in the water supply too. She's impressing on us how dangerous it is, because everyone knows that zombies are incapable of hurting other zombies. That's why it's spreading so fast. I reach the window and stop. My arms are limp at my sides, and I can feel the lopsided bun on my head slowly falling out. There's something damp on my sweatshirt. What did I spill on my sweatshirt? Outside the window, I see him. He's climbing the porch steps. He's lifting one foot, and he's looking down at it. Then he's dropping it, thump, onto the step. He's lifting the next foot. He's looking at it. Then he's dropping it. Thump. I take a step back. He's an old man, a stranger I don't know, with stringy gray hair and mottled green skin. The brass buttons on his moldy wool coat still shine in the sunlight. Looking at them makes one half of my head ping with pain. His fingers are curled into claws. His face is gnarled into a wince, his teeth slimy and yellowed. I turn away. Thump. He's a step closer. I turn again. On the floor of the living room is a bath towel. Oh, that's why my shirt is wet. I took a shower this morning. I start to move, pushing my feet forward. One, then the next, then the other again. I reach for the doorway to the kitchen. Like, if I can find it with my fingers, I can draw myself through the doorway faster than my feet can move me. Why are my feet so slow? I kick the bath towel out of the way. It's still damp, like my sweatshirt. What do? I say, careful to keep my voice low. I'm somewhat surprised to hear my own slurred speech. Who am I talking to? What do? What was the plan? Was there a plan? My brain tried to slog through the past day to remember the plan. I remember my husband this morning. He was leaving the house to go to work, I think. He must have been, because he was wearing his jacket and was standing in the doorway. And I was sitting on the couch, heavy-armed and tired. And he'd told me. What had he told me? The same thing he told me every day. Do something for yourself today. Just one thing. I must have said something back, because he smiled at whatever it was. One specific thing. I reach the kitchen doorway. That's why I took the shower. I remember now. That was something for myself. Thump. The newest thump was so much louder than the others that I grasped the kitchen doorway to keep myself from falling. A needle of pain wriggled through my abdomen. Quiet, I hiss toward the front porch. The zombie had made it up the steps and is at the door. I can see his shadow through the window as he leans heavily on the door. Thump. He hammers again. Shh, I say desperately. He needs to be quiet. Doesn't he know he needs to be quiet? I start to draw myself around the kitchen island, one hand over the other, guiding my stiff body. It's not as bright in here, and I can see better. My eyes fumble over old takeout containers and empty water bottles, and the sink piled high with dishes. Piled so high with dishes. Before I went to the hospital, I would have never let it get this bad. The gloves I usually use to wash the dishes are 1,000 miles away, down on the floor by several pairs of socks. Thump, crack, creak, creak. I stop, my hands placed on the kitchen counter, holding me still. I know that creak. It is a sound that washes over me every evening and fills me with relief. Why? Why do I love that sound? Now, it's the sound of the door opening as the zombie walks into my house. The zombie is walking into my house. No, oh no, I whisper and look around the dim kitchen. Where's my phone? It's in the living room. Thump, thump. Footsteps in the living room, and I hear a ragged, rancid breath. Suddenly, my hands let go of the kitchen counter, and I'm moving, my feet carrying me, careening through the house, stumbling, unmoored, out into the hall and across and into the dark, dark bathroom. The door shuts behind me, and I blink once and again and again. Images of the spinning rooms spiraling in my vision before settling into the dark outline of the bathroom. Sink, toilet, empty toilet paper rolls, trash overflowing, and from down the hall, from the living room, I hear a voice. I can hear you in here. No one ever told me they talk. The zombie's voice drips under the bathroom door, snaking up my leg and draining into the pit of my stomach. His speech is slow and meticulous, his dead mouth trying to remember how to form words. You are breathing, the voice says. You are breathing so slow. Why are you breathing so slow? Why am I? I can't think. I can't make my brain think. All I can see when I close my eyes and remember is my husband standing in the doorway, looking at me. Why is he looking at me like that? Full of pity? Why is he speaking to me so slowly? Do one thing, he says, the words echoing in my sluggish mind. Do one specific thing, just for you. I did what he said. I look at the bathtub. I took a shower. A few water droplets are still dripping down from the shower head. I move forward, leaving the bathroom door. I hear heavy footsteps moving so slowly through the house behind me. I need to tell the zombie to walk quieter. He needs to be quiet. I hold out a hand, and I shiver as a cold water droplet splashes into my palm. I can barely see it in the dark, but my heart starts to sink, slowly, dropping from my chest down into my stomach, where slow, steady panic is building just under my ribcage. Why am I full of dread? Why does the water on my skin make me feel sick? Why can't I move fast enough to get to safety? My brain used to be smart and quick. Now it isn't. I'm never going to be quick again. I will find you. I jump as the voice sounds again. This time, closer. He's just across the hall in the kitchen. He's looking at the sink full of dirty dishes. I yank my hand out of the shower like it's a fire and start moving again, letting my feet stumble and rush. My hand fumbles on the doorknob and the door swings open, and I see a shadow cutting across the floor of the hall. I've lost a sock, and my feet stamp. 1, 2, 1, 2, down the hall. I pass a closed bedroom door on my way. Shh. I need to be quiet. Stop being so loud. Why are you running? The rasping voice grates through the house. I can feel you. You're tired. You want to sleep. I reach the basement stairs. and I stop. To my left, the back door of the house, leading out into the overgrown backyard, and the bright sunlight dappling on the grass and flowers. I think I can smell the fresh grass and perfume of the flowers, even from here. And to my right, the rickety basement stairs, leading down into moldy darkness. You don't want to escape. Where is there to escape to, anyway? My feet are stuck to the floor. I can't run. I look down at my hand, damp from the water from the shower, and I remember that I took that shower for me, and that when I was done, I sat on the toilet in my towel, shivering and shaking, and I didn't feel better, and my ears were ringing with screaming, and my head was aching, and my stomach was twisting, and I was tired. I told them at the hospital I was so tired, and they sent me home anyway. It's all I can think anymore, and no amount of warm showers make me feel better. Why not? I can't seem to feel better. I'm tired. I turn away from the back door, and my feet drop onto the basement steps. I hear him behind me. Thump, thump. He's following. My feet hit the basement steps. Thump, thump. He's following. I reach out, raking my fingers along the concrete walls, balancing my stumbling legs and feet. Where are my feet? Where did I leave them? Oh, they're here, right underneath me. I reach the cold floor of the basement and step over a puddle at the base of the steps, and I pass the light switch on the wall. I can see from the pale light that shines in through the small windows, bins and boxes piled up where I left them, half open and spilling their contents on the floor. That was from before, when I cared about organization and neatness. Now, I can't even look at them. That's right, the croaking voice says. It's coming from the top of the stairs. It's grinding down the wood steps and splashing onto the concrete floor. Go down into your grave. Go down to drown alone. You do not want to walk back up again. My fingers trail along the dusty top of a box, then the edge of a bookshelf loaded with cans of beans and tomatoes and vegetables. My glazed eyes trail over the rows of cans, and I have to blink myself awake. I used to be different. I used to be awake. After what happened, whatever else there is, it's like I'm gone. I have to press a hand to my stomach, holding in my stitches and my guts even to walk. I miss the person I used to be. My feet shuffle along, 1 foot warm, 1 foot cold, 1 sock on, 1 sock off. I weave my way through the old bikes and laundry baskets to where the washer and dryer are crouching in the corner. I can hear his loud feet on the steps. One thing, one specific thing, just for me. I want to scream, to fill my lungs and holler as loud as I can, but instead, it comes out as barely a whisper. "Be quiet," I hiss. "You need to be quiet." My hands rest. One on the washer, one on the dryer. I pause. I need to remember how to use my knees. I look down, and I remember, and bend, twisting at the waist, and bending my creaking knees all the way down until I'm on the floor. It's damp down here, water trickling in through the cinder blocks and oozing through the cracks in the floor. I place one hand on the cold floor, the water stinging my fingers with how cold it is. I reach behind me with the other hand. He's on his way down the steps. The steady thump, thump, thump echoing through the house. He's going faster because he knows. He knows why I came down here. Shh! Behind me, a dial on a metal safe clicks. Thump, thump, then splash. He reaches the puddle at the bottom of the stairs, and my eyes slowly look up. Up. He's tall and broad-shouldered, and I can see, in the dim light, the glint of his yellow teeth gnashing together. His eyes narrow when he sees me. Click, click, the dial behind me. "There you are," he says, and he's moving, his hands bumping into dusty boxes and canned goods. I'm still crouching, and I can feel the water seeping into my sweatpants. I should be shivering, but I'm not. It feels almost warm. Warm like blood, like my blood, pumping through me, swift and sure. "Here you are," he says. The safe clicks open, and my hand closes over something familiar and solid. "You're hiding down here to be found," he says, an ugly smile curling his gray lips. I'm holding the familiar object in my hand, and his eyes land on it. The smile widens, his teeth grinding together, spit dripping out of his mouth and onto his moldy coat. I raise a shaking hand. I pull in breath, and I let it out again. "You can't do that," he says, his mouth fumbling over the words, spitting them out one at a time. He raises a crooked finger with a broken, bloody nail, pointing toward the ceiling and the floor above us. "If you do that, you won't be quiet. Don't you want to be quiet?" I do want to be quiet. I want to curl up down here in the warm water and sleep, where I can't feel hungry, and my stomach and hips and back don't hurt, where my head doesn't ache. He must see my shoulders sag, because he takes a shuddering step forward. "You came down here to die." "No," I say, and my voice is louder than it should be. "One specific thing, just for me." I can feel my hands again as they raise the gun I'd pulled from the safe and level it at the zombie. His old, dead eyes don't change or look alarmed. I'm here because I want to live. Bang, thump. Upstairs, in the bedroom I had skipped, Suddenly startled awake, my newborn baby starts to cry. I look at the rows of canned goods, vegetables and beans and soup. I think it's time to cook some lunch.